In 1979, an independent Australian filmmaker forged a dystopian empire on asphalt and blood, paying an unknown lead actor a mere $15,000 to risk his life. How did a crew of severely underpaid outcasts spark a billion-dollar global franchise? And who was eventually swallowed whole by the Hollywood machine? The gasoline fumes have vanished, leaving behind a brutal trail of fractured lives, silent deaths, and untouchable wealth. The scorched reality of 2026 finally uncovers the bare truth. Number 1. Mel Gibson, $15,000. Born in Peekskill, New York, to a railroad brakeman and a dedicated mother before his family immigrated to Australia, a completely unknown, battered 21-year-old acting student stepped onto the desolate highways. He flawlessly embodied Max Rokitansky, the hardened, leather-clad highway patrolman, slowly descending into vengeance as his fragile society crumbles. Bleeding raw charisma, despite literally nursing injuries from a brutal bar brawl just before his audition. Gibson was the ultimate necessary gamble for a shoestring budget independent production. Because this dystopian vision carried immense financial risk and was essentially operating on fumes, there were absolutely no back-end box office percentage deals offered to anyone on the Unforgiving set. To secure his gritty, explosive leading man, the studio handed the young, unproven actor a shockingly modest, flat upfront salary, officially recorded at a mere $15,000. Today, in the complex, highly scrutinized reality of 2026, the 70-year-old cinematic titan remains vibrantly alive, commanding a completely different level of untouchable power. Resting upon a staggering multi-hundred-million-dollar fortune built through massive acting blockbusters and masterful Academy Award-winning directorial triumphs, Gibson survived his own brutal cycles of catastrophic, highly publicized personal downfalls. He refused to be permanently exiled by the industry, violently clawing his way back to independent filmmaking dominance to craft visually stunning cinematic epics on his own uncompromising terms. The modern public does not view him simply as a young, underpaid Australian cop. They fiercely revere him as a polarizing, undeniably brilliant Hollywood heavyweight who manipulated a $15,000 gamble into an immortal empire. Number 2. Hugh Keays-Byrne, $10,000. Standing directly in the path of the collapsing social order was a disciplined stage actor utilizing sheer psychological warfare. At 31, Hugh Keays-Byrne, born in British India to English parents before permanently relocating to Australia, weaponized his classical theater training to terrorize the desolate highways. He dominated the screen as Toe Cutter, the calculated, manipulative leader of the motorcycle gang, responsible for executing the protagonist's family. Injecting methodical madness into a low-budget exploitation film, his grounded menace was critical to establishing the brutal dystopian stakes. Recognizing his immense value as the primary antagonist burdened with demanding screen time, the independent production compensated him with a standardized upfront salary estimated at $10,000. In the stark reality of 2026, the cinematic world has long processed the loss of this commanding industry veteran. Keays-Byrne passed away in 2020 at the age of 73, leaving behind a heavily studied bulletproof acting legacy. He flatly refused to disappear as a discarded 70s villain. Instead, he secured historical permanence by returning to the exact same franchise 36 years later, physically and psychologically reinventing himself as the Warlord Immortan Joe in the blockbuster Mad Max Fury Road. The modern public does not dismiss him as a generic low-budget antagonist. They meticulously analyze him as a massive structural pillar of apocalyptic cinema who successfully dictated the psychological terror of two entirely separate generations of filmgoers. Number 3. Steve Bisley, $80. Sharing the asphalt with the brooding protagonist was his fiercely loyal, adrenaline-fueled partner in justice. At 27, Steve Bisley, born to a working-class Australian family in New South Wales, unleashed a burst of pure, reckless energy onto the screen. As Gibson's actual classmate from the prestigious National Institute of Dramatic Art, he flawlessly embodied Jim Goose, the charismatic doomed patrol officer whose horrific, fiery execution violently pushes Max over the edge. Bringing crucial humanity to the brutal narrative, his emotional performance was absolutely vital. Operating under a strictly capped independent budget, he received a standard supporting rate. To secure this essential secondary role, the production compensated him with a modest upfront salary, officially estimated at $8,000. In the reality of 2026, the 74-year-old veteran remains vibrantly alive, standing as a fiercely respected pillar of Australian television and theater. Never consumed by the massive global shadow of the dystopian franchise, Bisley carved out a relentless career anchoring acclaimed domestic crime dramas and publishing deeply reflective literary memoirs. Weathering his own dark, highly publicized personal storms over the decades, he firmly refused to let controversy destroy his legacy. He did not chase American Hollywood millions, choosing instead to secure a comfortable, culturally significant footprint in his homeland. The modern public does not view him merely as a tragic burned highway casualty. They fiercely revere him as a resilient, multidimensional acting titan who injected undeniable soul into the greatest vehicular carnage ever captured on film. Number 4. Joanne Samuel. $50. Thrust into the unforgiving mechanical chaos at the absolute last minute. A 21-year-old Australian actress was unexpectedly forced to anchor the devastating emotional core of the entire film. Joanne Samuel, born to a working-class family in New South Wales, originally was not even meant to be on the scorching asphalt sets. She urgently stepped into the chaotic production, replacing the original lead actress who had just suffered a severe offset vehicle accident. She flawlessly embodied Jessie Rokitansky, Max's deeply loving doomed wife whose brutal, senseless murder pushes the entire dystopian narrative into pure, irreversible vengeance. Bringing vital warmth to a cold, violently bleak world, her tragic on-screen presence was the absolute emotional catalyst of the movie. Negotiating under intense, last-minute emergency circumstances within a strictly capped independent shoestring budget, she received absolutely no back-end percentages. To secure her crucial vulnerability, the studio handed her a modest, flat upfront salary officially estimated at just $5,000. In the reality of 2026, the 68-year-old actress remains vibrantly alive, living peacefully and securely far outside the toxic, unforgiving Hollywood machine. Never seduced by the massive American Blockbuster franchise, she helped birth Samuel deliberately secured a quiet, deeply fulfilled life in her Australian homeland. She successfully transitioned away from the grueling spotlight to become an independent director and a dedicated mother, completely refusing to allow the brutal entertainment industry to consume her spirit. The modern public does not view her simply as a forgotten, tragic cinematic victim. They fiercely revere her as the irreplaceable emotional anchor of a legendary franchise, a resilient talent who manipulated a chaotic $5,000 emergency replacement gig into permanent, untouchable cinematic immortality. Number 5. Roger Ward, $40. Standing tall as the absolute pillar of failing institutional authority, was a seasoned, towering Australian tough guy actor. At 42, Roger Ward, born in Adelaide to a working-class family, and having already carved out a fierce reputation in brutal 70s, exploitation cinema stepped directly into the chaotic precinct. He flawlessly embodied Fifi McAfee, the physically imposing, deeply cynical police captain desperately attempting to keep his collapsing patrol unit from completely disintegrating. Bringing crucial gravitas to the desperate law enforcement agency, his seasoned acting chops grounded the bizarre, crumbling dystopian society. Because he was an established professional acting in a high-risk independent project that operated with absolutely no back-end deals, the studio compensated him using a strict per-day shooting rate. To secure his veteran expertise for the essential leadership role, the production handed him a highly modest, flat upfront salary, officially estimated at $4,000. In the stark reality of 2026, the 89-year-old veteran remains vibrantly alive, standing as an untouchable living legend of Ozploitation cinema. He never chased shallow Hollywood blockbusters, successfully insulating himself with a secure, comfortable, domestic legacy, built entirely on his own uncompromising terms. Refusing to fade into obscurity, Ward passionately evolved into an accomplished scriptwriter and author, commanding immense respect on the global convention circuit where dedicated genre fans continually celebrate his massive career. The modern public does not view him merely as a forgotten, underpaid fictional police captain. They fiercely revere him as a definitive, unstoppable titan of Australian cult cinema, who brilliantly anchored one of the most explosive, independent films ever created. Number 6. Tim Burns, $30. At 26, Tim Burns, born to a modest family in Canberra, Australia, stepped onto the scorched asphalt to embody the absolute bottom rung of the terrifying motorcycle gang. He flawlessly portrayed Johnny the Boy, the chaotic, cowardly, and drug-addled antagonist whose pathetic survival instincts ultimately seal his explosive fate at the hands of a vengeful Max, injecting crucial manic desperation into the villainous crew. His unhinged psychological breakdown was vital for the climactic ending. Operating strictly on the lowest tier of an independent shoestring budget, there were absolutely no back-end box office profits available for the secondary cast. To secure his manic supporting energy, the production compensated him with a basic, flat upfront salary, officially estimated at a mere $3,000. In the stark reality of 2026, the 73-year-old actor remains vibrantly alive, living peacefully, far removed from the relentless grind of the Hollywood machine. Never seeking to capitalize on his explosive cult fame with cheap blockbuster cameos, Burns deliberately transitioned away from the grueling spotlight. He secured a quiet, deeply private life in his homeland, occasionally shifting his artistic focus toward behind-the-scenes production work entirely on his own terms. He firmly refused to let the brutal entertainment cycle consume his identity. The modern public does not view him simply as a forgotten henchman left to burn on a desolate highway. They fiercely revere him as a brilliant talent who permanently anchored one of the most iconic, psychologically devastating cinematic finales in history. Number 7. Geoff Parry, $20. Standing as the coldly calculating enforcer of the marauding gang, a 25-year-old Australian actor brought sheer, understated menace to the scorching asphalt. Geoff Parry, born to a modest working-class family, brilliantly embodied Bubba Zanetti, the sharp-shooting, emotionless lieutenant serving as the lethal right hand to the psychotic toe-cutter. While others screamed across the desolate wasteland, his chilling, weaponized calmness anchored the organized threat of the criminal outcasts. Working within the absolute constraints of a shoestring exploitation budget, there were zero back-end box office percentages available for secondary gang members. To secure his highly impactful screen time and terrifying stoicism, the production compensated him with a strictly capped flat upfront salary, estimated at a mere $2,000. In the stark reality of 2026, the 73-year-old former actor remains vibrantly alive, entirely disconnected from the relentless machinery of the Hollywood entertainment industry. Refusing to chase shallow blockbuster cameos or exploit his massive cult status, Parry deliberately stepped away from the grueling cinematic spotlight decades ago. He secured a comfortable private existence in his homeland, successfully transitioning into a quiet, respected life far outside the public eye. He never allowed the brutal cycles of fame to consume his identity. The modern public does not view him as a forgotten, underpaid biker discarded in the dust. They fiercely revere him as a master of understated terror, who manipulated a tiny $2,000 paycheck into an immortal, chilling legacy within a legendary dystopian franchise. Number 8, Paul Johnstone, won $500. At 28, Paul Johnstone, a versatile performer born in New Zealand before migrating to Sydney to aggressively pursue stage acting, stepped onto the Unforgiving asphalt sets. He flawlessly embodied Kundalini, the feral, deeply unpredictable gang member whose terrifying primal aggression ultimately earns him a brutally dismembering cinematic fate. Stripping away unnecessary theatricality for direct psychological intensity, Johnstone brought raw, guttural survivalism to the Outback criminals. Because he was cast as a secondary antagonist within the sprawling motorcycle gang, the financially strained independent studio calculated his financial compensation strictly by his required days on set, securing his unhinged physical energy without offering a single back-end box office percentage point. The production handed him a highly modest flat upfront salary, officially estimated at $1,500. In the stark reality of 2026, the 75-year-old veteran remains vibrantly alive, living completely untethered from the toxic, relentless Hollywood machine. Never obsessed with desperately chasing hollow blockbuster cameos, Johnstone intelligently pivoted his creative energy toward a highly secure, respected domestic career as a prolific voiceover artist and professional musician. He frequently and actively engages with dedicated genre fans on the global convention circuit, fiercely preserving the genuine, unvarnished history of the grueling independent production. The modern public does not dismiss him merely as a forgotten, underpaid cinematic casualty. They deeply revere him as an essential, enduring guardian of Australian cult cinema, who successfully manipulated a tiny $1,500 paycheck into lifelong artistic independence. The Australian outback asphalt cooled decades ago, but the billion-dollar empire these severely underpaid actors built in 1979 remains immortal. Whether their real lives ended in tragic silence, expanded into untouchable dominance, or quietly retreated into absolute obscurity, the raw cinematic history they forged cannot be erased. Hollywood's most brutal secrets are still bleeding in the shadows. Do not let the next untold story pass you by. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications and join our investigation before the absolute truth is buried forever.